The timid office assistant had been nearly invisible until a bully pushed her beyond her limits. The reaction of the powerful tycoon took less than 20 seconds. 3 careers were obliterated in a single night. What Evelyn did not know was that many years ago, she had saved this man's life on a desolate stretch of highway under a pitch-black night, and he had never forgotten it. On a Friday morning at the end of November, Evelyn Hart arrived at the office an hour earlier than everyone else, as she always did. Chicago outside was still asleep, the chill seeping through her thick coat. Yet she arrived punctually, quietly, and with a steady certainty that had marked every day of the past 3 years. She was an administrative assistant at Langston and Company, one of the largest construction corporations in the Midwest. Not a person of importance, not in management, certainly not someone whose name anyone remembered in board meetings. In the eyes of many, Evelyn was simply she. The one who made the coffee, the one who printed the documents, the one who stood silently in the corner with eyes cast downward and hands always busy. Evelyn was 50, living alone in a small apartment in South Chicago, where the neighbors only knew her as a retired teacher and had never heard her voice rise above a whisper. She had once been an elementary school teacher, but after a haunting divorce from a controlling and emotionally abusive husband, Evelyn decided to leave everything behind, change her name, relocate, erase all traces online, and start over from zero. Langston and Company was where she chose to live quietly and unobtrusively like a shadow, unnoticed, uncared for. Yet, ironically, despite her efforts to remain small and humble, Evelyn had become a favorite target of certain people in the company. Denise Porter, the communications director, along with her 2 close associates, Ronald Green from finance and attorney Lisa Huang, regularly used Evelyn as bait for mocking jokes at internal parties. They called her the Langston Ghost, or worse, whispered that she had gotten her job through a mysterious connection with the boss. Evelyn had never resisted. She was used to being ignored, laughed at behind her back, and most of all, misunderstood. In her mind, the worst thing was not the insults themselves, but the sense that speaking up would only make things worse. She had lived her entire life learning to be small, hard to notice, because it was the safest way she knew to survive. No one could hurt a person they could not see, right? What Evelyn did not realize was that throughout her 3 years at Langston and Company, there had always been someone watching her from afar, silently, without a word, and that someone was the most powerful man in the building, Nicholas Langston. The CEO of the corporation, who appeared rarely, spoke even less, but whenever he entered a room, everyone fell silent. Nicholas almost never spoke to Evelyn, only offering a polite nod if they happened to pass each other in the hallway. Yet he always received his coffee exactly as he liked, documents delivered on time, and meeting rooms meticulously prepared down to the smallest detail. Evelyn had no idea that each of her quiet, meticulous actions had been noticed. More importantly, she did not know that many years earlier, on a snowy night on Interstate 190, she had risked her life to pull a man from a burning vehicle and disappeared before the ambulance arrived. That man was Nicholas Langston. He had never forgotten the fearful eyes of the woman, the trembling hands still forcing the car door open, the whispered words, "Don't sleep, I'm here," as he nearly lost consciousness from blood loss and smoke. Nicholas woke up in the hospital, unable to find the identity of the person who had saved him. She had vanished as if she had never existed. Until the day Evelyn walked into the interview room 3 years later, with a resume far more modest than her capabilities, avoiding eye contact and shrinking into herself as if apologizing for taking up space. Nicholas recognized her instantly, but he said nothing. He simply hired her, and waited until the world forced him to act. And that moment was drawing near. Very near. If you're following this story, Don't forget to subscribe to the Underworld Love Stories channel. Like and share so you can hear more dramatic and emotional stories every day. We'd love to know where you're watching from. Leave a comment and share where you're listening, so we can see where Evelyn and Nicholas's story reaches in the world's streets, rooms, and hearts. The year-end celebration of Langston and Company was held on the 42nd floor in a magnificent hall adorned with crystal chandeliers, an elegant buffet, and a towering champagne display rising high in the center of the room. Employees from all departments were invited, dressed formally, chatting and laughing, glasses clinking lightly as soft classical jazz played through concealed speakers in the ceiling. Evelyn stood at the edge of the room, almost blending into the wall. She held the serving tray close to her chest, her hands trembling slightly from the cold and anxiety, eyes fixed on the sparkling glasses atop the champagne tower, as if a mere touch from her would bring everything crashing down. She did not belong here. Even as a permanent staff member, Evelyn always felt like an unlisted guest. No one truly called her by name. No one asked how she felt. And tonight was no different, until Denise Porter's voice cut through the gentle atmosphere like a cold blade gliding across glass. "Be careful, Evelyn. We wouldn't want you to topple this precious tower, would we?" Those standing nearby, Ronald Green, Lisa Huang, and a few other managers turned, a few snickering. Evelyn froze, gripping the tray tighter, forcing a weak smile. "I'm sorry," she murmured. Always apologizing. She always apologized. Had she ever done anything else but timidly apologize? Evelyn wondered. Ronald interjected with a mocking tone. "I've been here 10 years and still don't understand why she's kept around." Lisa added, half joking, half serious. "Maybe she knows secrets behind the director's door." The group erupted in laughter. Evelyn felt her cheeks burn, not from champagne, but from humiliation. She wanted to respond, to deny, to scream that she was just an ordinary office worker, diligent and devoted. But her throat constricted. As always, her defiance stayed locked behind tightly pressed lips. She remained still, like a shadow, as usual. "Don't pretend to be innocent," Lisa continued, her voice low enough for only those nearby to hear. 3 years as an assistant without ever being reassigned or reevaluated? Everyone sees you are given special treatment, especially those nights you stay late in the office. For what? Cleaning tables or beds? Evelyn exhaled sharply. The glasses on her tray trembled. A few people nearby began to notice, yet no one intervened. No one ever had. Denise sneered, then suddenly snatched the tray from Evelyn's hands and shoved it back into her chest. "Careful, Ghost. Don't leave a trace." The push was not strong, but enough to unbalance Evelyn. She stepped back, her heel catching the leg of a cocktail table behind her. The champagne tower tilted slightly, and before anyone could react, the tray fell. The sound of shattering crystal pierced the drifting jazz music. Glasses of champagne tumbled onto the marble floor like streams of liquid gold spilling from the cracks of dignity. Evelyn fell forward, her hand landing on a shard of glass, sharp pain shooting through her. Blood began to mingle with the sparkling liquid on the floor. And suddenly, the music stopped entirely. The entire hall seemed frozen. 200 eyes fixed on her, the invisible woman now kneeling amidst the wreckage, trembling, blood flowing, and restrained tears. Denise still smiled coldly. "Perhaps this time you should truly disappear, Evelyn." But then, no one laughed. No one dared to utter another word. Because in that moment, the main door swung open, and Nicholas Langston stepped inside. The voice was not loud, yet it tore through the air in the room like thunder striking across a snowy sky. "Who touched her?" No one answered. The entire banquet hall seemed to have its air sucked out. Evelyn still knelt on the floor, her hand pressed against the bleeding wound, eyes wide with panic, fixed on the finely polished Italian leather shoes that had just stopped at the edge of her vision. A tall shadow loomed over her, casting darkness like a wall between her and the entire crowd, holding its breath. Nicholas Langston stood there motionless, neither angry nor shouting, radiating a deadly silence from his impassive face, from the depths of his eyes like an abyss, from the way he stood, upright, cold, and commanding. "Who touched her?" he repeated, this time slower, each word dripping like it had been carved from a sharp blade. Denise Porter went pale. The glass in her hand tilted slightly, spilling onto her dress without her noticing. Ronald Green did not dare raise his head. Lisa Huang instinctively stepped back, her heel clicking against the stone floor. Evelyn tried to speak, to say it was nothing, just an accident, just a misunderstanding, that she did not want to make a scene. But her throat was parched, every sound trapped between fear and shock. Nicholas looked at no one but her. He stepped forward, sat down in front of Evelyn, causing hundreds to gasp in disbelief. He removed his outer coat and placed it gently on the floor, then with a bare hand lifted her arm lightly. Evelyn saw his eyes clearly, no longer just the gaze of a cold CEO. It was the look of someone who had witnessed something unforgivable. His hand rested on her wrist, gentle but firm, as if holding a precious shard of glass that had just fallen. "Who hurt you?" he asked, this time directed solely at her, his voice low and almost tender. Evelyn did not dare lie. She nodded slightly, eyes flicking toward Denise, then toward the shattered crystal tray. Nicholas closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them, he stood up. His voice rang out decisively. "The party is over. Everyone leave. Now." Someone from the band tried to continue playing, but Nicholas's gaze silenced them instantly. Vincent, head of security, emerged from the shadows. Nicholas said no need to repeat. "Those three, just Denise, Ronald, and Lisa, are no longer permitted within 15 meters of my office. If they have issues, they may ask HR when receiving unemployment benefits." Denise let out a shrill objection, panicked. "You cannot fire me for something so trivial. I've been here 12 years. I have a contract. I have a lawyer." Nicholas turned to look at her, slowly. No one in the room could hear what he said. Yet after those few silent seconds, Denise fell mute. Then she turned away. Ronald and Lisa retreated as well, faces drained of color. The crowd, frozen as if turned to stone, began to stir. Coats were gathered, whispers exchanged. Eyes avoided Nicholas as if his gaze were a laser capable of incinerating careers. In less than 5 minutes, the once crowded room was left with only the band packing up, the servers, and Evelyn still sitting on the floor, her hand wrapped with a clean cloth taken from the buffet table. She looked at him as if seeing something at once immense and strange. He was not angry, yet more terrifying than any fury she had ever witnessed. Part of her wanted to flee, but another part, deeper, quieter, whispered that for the first time in years, someone had truly seen her. Not as the silent shadow, but as a human being. And that someone was the man the entire company feared. Nicholas Langston. The man Evelyn had once believed unaware of her existence had broken 3 years of silence to ask exactly one thing: who touched her? And he did not need any other reason to act. The news traveled faster than any internal memo. Before the first sunlight of Monday morning could even touch the 42nd floor office windows, all of Langston and Company was abuzz over the sudden absence of 3 powerful figures. Denise Porter, the communications director, Ronald Green, the deputy finance director, and Lisa Huang, the senior legal counsel, were all missing from the first week briefing. Their names had vanished from the internal email distribution lists. Nameplates on their office doors had been quietly removed overnight. IT staff had been instructed to lock all their work accounts at 3 a.m. No official explanation was provided. No farewell emails. No acknowledgement of contributions. Only a cold silence blanketed every floor of headquarters. Their absence left a quiet void that no one dared to mention, as if those three had never existed. Yet everyone knew. Everyone knew. They had witnessed the scene at the party. They had heard Nicholas Langston's question. They had seen the three of them leave the hall in silence, without a word of goodbye, no one daring to follow. Evelyn did not return to the office that morning. She was given temporary leave to recover from her hand injury, but in truth, she needed more than a bandage and a few days off. She needed time to process what had just happened. The three people dismissed were not only the ones who had bullied her, they were pillars of the company's operations. They were regularly invited to strategic meetings, mentioned in internal newsletters, cited in annual reports. Terminating them was not a light decision. It was a message, and Nicholas Langston had sent that message with a speed and decisiveness that no one could have anticipated. Meanwhile, the HR team had worked through the night to finalize separation papers, handle contractual obligations, and erase every trace. It was said that Denise screamed in her office, threatening to sue the company and take matters to court. But when Langston and Company's attorney arrived with copies of internal surveillance records, security footage, and witness statements from employees, she fell silent. Ronald left that very night without a word. Lisa was the last to leave the building, leaving behind the mixture of pity and fear in the eyes of those who had once flattered her in the hallways. That afternoon, when Nicholas entered the executive boardroom, no one spoke. They simply rose, silent, awaiting instruction. He made no mention of the incident, did not name anyone, did not lecture or threaten. He said only one brief, low, weighty sentence. If anyone else in this room believes the dignity of another human being is something to be mocked, I invite them to leave along with the three who departed last night. The room remained utterly silent. Evelyn heard the story later, 2 days afterward, from a colleague in the elevator. That person did not know who she was, did not recognize that the small woman standing in the corner of the elevator had been the center of the storm that had swept through the company. She listened, heart pounding not with fear, but because for the first time in years, she felt she mattered. Her existence was no longer ignored, she had been seen. And the one who had seen her was none other than Nicholas Langston. He had done what no one else ever had, not defending with words, but with action. Swift, decisive, unyielding. 3 careers had collapsed simply because they had touched her. That alone was enough not just to change the company. It was beginning to change Evelyn herself. 3 days after the shocking event, Evelyn still had not returned to the office. The wound on her hand had dried, but the aftershock in her heart smoldered like an underground fire beneath cold ashes. She sat in her small apartment with the curtains drawn, holding a cup of hot tea she had brewed nearly an hour before but had yet to sip. She was accustomed to doing everything in silence, living on the margins, untouched, unnoticed. Yet in a single evening, everything had been swept into an unnamed storm. 3 people had lost their jobs. The entire company had been shaken. And Nicholas Langston, the man she had thought was a world away, had looked directly at her, called her by name, and defended her without hesitation. The only question ringing in Evelyn's mind was why. Why did he care so much about her? She was neither beautiful nor young, nothing remarkable. Of all the people working under him, why her? The answer came on a late afternoon, as the first snowflakes of the season began to fall outside. There was a knock at the door. She opened it slightly and froze. Nicholas Langston. No secretary, no assistant, no driver. He stood there in a black coat, holding a paper bag containing 2 cups of hot coffee and a small box. "I only have 10 minutes," he said. "I don't want to intrude, but I thought I needed to say this." Evelyn invited him in. Her apartment was small, neat, humble, much like herself. They sat at the small dining table by the window. He placed the coffee before her. Not the kind she brewed for him every morning, but the exact brand she used to drink at the corner cafe 2 blocks away. She was surprised but did not ask. He was silent for a few seconds, then looked at her. I wasn't sure until that night. But when I saw your eyes, I knew. Evelyn set down her cup, heart racing. Nicholas continued, his voice steady and deep. 7 years ago, on a night of heavy snow, I was driving back from a shareholders' meeting to the suburbs. On the highway, my car skidded, left the road, and hit the guardrail. I was trapped in the vehicle, leg broken, head struck hard. As I was close to losing consciousness, someone opened the car door and pulled me out. I couldn't see their face clearly, only the terrified eyes and bloodied but resolute hands. They whispered by my ear, keeping me awake, keeping me alive. And then they disappeared before the ambulance arrived. Evelyn felt the room slow down. She remembered that night vividly. She had been driving home after a night shift at a convenience store when she saw the crumpled car on the roadside, smoke rising in the dim red light. She had not thought, only acted. No one knew what she had done. She had told no one. It was part of the years she had tried to forget. But now, it lived again in every word of the man sitting before her. I searched for you for a long time, Nicholas said slowly. But there were no clues, no name, no license plate, no camera footage. I only had those eyes in my memory. Until you walked into the interview room at Langston 3 years ago. Evelyn recalled that day, his gaze as he looked at her resume, silent yet attentive. Now she understood. He had recognized her. I said nothing because I wasn't sure if you wanted me to recall it. I thought perhaps you had chosen to forget it. But when I saw how you were treated at the party, I could not remain silent any longer. She felt her throat tighten. A tear slid down her cheek without her noticing, not from emotion, but from relief. Throughout the years of living quietly, of hiding, she had thought that act of courage was a fleeting, meaningless impulse, but it had saved someone, and that someone, in some way, had not forgotten. Nicholas looked at her, his gaze no longer cold but filled with profound gratitude. You saved me without asking for anything. Now I just want you to know that if there is anything I can do to help you, just say it. Evelyn did not know how to respond, but in that moment she realized that the world was no longer entirely indifferent. There were things done out of instinct, kindness, human nature, that one day would return in ways no one could predict. And sometimes, a snowy night from years ago could be the reason a life changed forever. The air between them after that confession felt different. It was neither tense nor entirely comfortable, but a profound silence, as if they were standing on a bridge just rebuilt after 7 years of disconnection. Evelyn sat quietly, still holding her now cold cup of coffee, her eyes red but shining with something strange, a touch of trust, a hint of confusion, and so much yet unnamed. Nicholas watched her, unhurried, without pressure, as if he knew she needed time to piece together everything that had just fractured inside. Then he said something Evelyn never thought she would hear from a man like him. You once saved me, now it's my turn. The words were not loud, yet they left a lasting resonance in her heart. She looked at him, not fully grasping the meaning. I don't need you to repay me, she murmured, voice slightly trembling but sincere. It was something I did because I could not ignore someone in need. I know, Nicholas nodded. But what I want to do is not about debt. It is because I have allowed you to live in silence for too long, even though I knew you deserved better treatment. He paused, eyes softening. I have watched you for the past 3 years, not in a negative way, just, I have always noticed. The way you work, the care you put into every small detail, the way you carefully avoid people's eyes. I once thought it was shyness, But now I understand. It was how you survived." Evelyn said nothing. His words seemed to lift the veil she had kept over herself for so many years. She had thought she had hidden every crack, every wound, every scar in her spirit. Yet somehow, Nicholas had seen it all. He reached into his coat pocket and placed a small envelope on the table. "This is the official letter from the legal department. The 3 others have signed their acceptance of the severance terms. No litigation, no lawsuits. They are forbidden from approaching you in any form. If they violate this, the company's security team will act immediately." Evelyn took the envelope, opening it with hands trembling slightly, but her gaze gradually steadied. This was something she had never imagined, someone standing clearly on her side, protecting her decisively, without concealment. Yet what moved her most was the unspoken understanding. He did not ask too many questions, did not compel her to recount her past, did not force her to explain why she had lived like a shadow for so long. He simply quietly offered her safety, then withdrew, leaving her to decide how to move forward. Nicholas stood, preparing to leave. But before opening the door, he turned to look at her one more time. "You do not need to thank me. I owe you more than words. If you ever need anything, just call." He handed her a business card, not a public one, but a personal card with only his mobile number and a single line. Nicholas Langston. Evelyn held it, her palm gripping it gently. He left, and the door closed softly, as if no emotional storm had just passed. But inside Evelyn, something had shifted. She had once thought herself an ordinary woman, living day by day, avoiding attention, steering clear of conflict. Yet in just a few days, a man had stepped out from a world of immense power just to tell her that she mattered, and that it was now his turn to protect her. Those words were not merely a promise, they were the beginning of a new chapter, one that even Evelyn did not yet know where it would lead. But for the first time in many years, she was no longer afraid. When Evelyn returned to the office on the Monday morning of the following week, everything seemed different. No one looked at her with curiosity or whispered behind her back as before. Those who had once mocked her now avoided her gaze. The security guard at the main lobby nodded at her with an unusual air of respect. Even the floor manager, who had never remembered her name correctly before, now addressed her politely as Ms. Hart. But what truly unsettled her was not the change in how people treated her. It was the quiet, protective presence of an invisible circle Nicholas had cast around her. During her first week back, Evelyn began noticing small things she could not explain. For instance, whenever she entered the elevator, there was always a security officer nearby, pretending to check the panel. When she walked through the hallways, someone always seemed to coincidentally go the same direction. At first, she thought it was chance. But then she realized their eyes were not on her. They were scanning the surroundings, earpieces in place, their vests slightly unbuttoned to reveal employee badges edged in red, a color reserved for senior security personnel. She did not ask anyone, but she felt it clearly. Nicholas had assigned her protection. Perhaps it was a private directive, outside official channels, so no one dared speak. She understood why. After the party incident, he did not want any further mishaps. Yet Evelyn struggled to breathe. The constant quiet gazes, the silent presence close behind, the ever-present footsteps reminded her of years spent with her ex-husband, a man who had monitored every action, every call, every breath. And the old fear surged again, even though she knew this time it was protection. But for Evelyn, sometimes those two feelings were separated by a heartbeat. She began losing sleep. Every morning entering the office was an internal struggle. She did not blame Nicholas, but she could not continue living as though constantly watched. On Thursday, she decided to speak with him. She went to his office at midday, unannounced. His secretary looked mildly surprised, but immediately let her in. Nicholas was standing by the window, holding a cup of coffee. He turned as he saw her, eyebrows slightly furrowed as if trying to guess what had brought her. "Are you all right?" Evelyn nodded, then shook her head. "I need to talk." Nicholas set his cup down and pulled a chair for her, but she remained standing. "I know you are trying to protect me. I know you mean no harm. But I cannot live like this. I need space. I need to feel in control." Nicholas was silent, listening to every word. Evelyn continued, voice tight but determined. "I spent so many years reclaiming the right to walk alone, to feel valuable without hiding in the shadows. And now, with someone always watching, even to help, I feel small and controlled like before. I don't want to return to that old self. I cannot." Nicholas exhaled, stepping closer. He did not deny anything. "I'm sorry. It was instinct. I lost control once, in that accident. When you pulled me out, there was nothing I could do but live because of your choice. I suppose I wanted to do the opposite, so you would never feel that helpless again." Evelyn smiled softly, the first time during their conversation. "Then let me be strong in my own way. I will speak up if I need help. But do not make me ask permission for freedom." Nicholas nodded, eyes softening. "Very well. From tomorrow, no one will follow you. But if anything happens, just send a message and I will come." Evelyn nodded. When she left his office, she felt a lightness in her chest, not because a powerful tycoon agreed to withdraw, but because for the first time she had spoken what she needed and had been heard. She was no longer a shadow, no longer the woman suffocated by protection. She was Evelyn Hart, and she was reclaiming herself. The days that followed at the office unfolded with an uncanny calm, as if the entire building was holding its breath, trying to find its rhythm again after the earthquake named Evelyn Hart. There were no more whispers behind her back, no more watchful eyes or half-smirking smiles. The air in meetings became more careful, more professional, and noticeably colder. Evelyn worked as she always did, arriving early, leaving late, precise, with every email, every printed document, every scheduled meeting. Yet something inside her remained unsettled. It was the uncertainty between her and Nicholas Langston. They had never defined their boundaries, never spoken openly about the true meaning behind all his quiet, protective gestures that lingered in her mind late into sleepless nights. It was not fear that kept her awake, but confusion. There were moments in his gaze that did not feel like those of a CEO toward his assistant. There were silences between them that made her heart beat faster than it should. And the worst part was, Evelyn no longer understood her own feelings. Gratitude, certainly. Respect? Absolutely. But beyond that, what else? And more importantly, what did he feel? On a Friday evening, when most departments had turned off their lights and the building began to empty, Evelyn stepped into Nicholas's office once again. He was sitting by the window, his suit jacket draped over the chair, a glass of scotch in his hand. When he saw her, he smiled faintly, as if he had known she would come. "Are you all right?" he asked, using a tone more personal than ever before. Evelyn didn't answer right away. She walked closer, stopping a few steps from his desk. "I need to talk." He nodded, setting the glass down, his expression serious. "You know I'm grateful to you," she began softly. "I never forgot that. But that doesn't mean I belong to you. I don't belong to anyone." Her words seemed to stop the room for a few seconds. Nicholas looked at her for a long time, his expression unreadable surprise, perhaps, or understanding. Evelyn continued, her voice slow and steady. "All my life, people have assigned me roles they wanted me to play. The dutiful daughter, the accommodating wife, the quiet employee. Everyone wanted me to be grateful for being protected, for being kept. But I don't live like that anymore." Nicholas gave a small nod, saying nothing, and she could tell he was truly listening. That gave her the courage to go on. I don't know what this is between us. I won't assume. But if you think your protection means I've become part of what you own, then I can't stay in this position anymore." Silence stretched. Then Nicholas stood, not approaching, keeping just enough distance across the desk. "I never thought of you as something I owned. If at any point my actions made you feel that way, I'm sorry." Evelyn hadn't expected that response. He continued, his voice low and deliberate. "I'm a man used to commanding, to control. But with you, I don't want that. I just didn't know another way to show it. Perhaps I've crossed lines, but the truth is, I care about you. Not because of a debt, not because of the past, but because of who you are, now." Evelyn held his gaze for a long time. In his eyes there was no possession, no calculation, only a rare sincerity. Finally, she nodded slightly. "I'm not promising anything, but I'll stay. On my own terms. Belonging to no one." Nicholas nodded, the corner of his lips lifting faintly. "That's enough." She left his office as the weekend's sunset spilled through the glass. Neither of them spoke further, but for the first time, they stood before each other not as debtor and benefactor, not as boss and employee, but as two independent free souls learning how to understand one another. There were no obligations, only choice, and Evelyn had chosen herself. Rumors began spreading just 1 week after the conversation between Evelyn and Nicholas. At first, they were only vague whispers echoing in elevators and break rooms. Employees speculated about Nicholas Langston's change in demeanor, how he had become quieter, sharper, more deliberate. Then someone noticed that Evelyn Hart, the woman who had once been nearly invisible in the company, now appeared beside him in internal meetings, not as the one serving coffee or hurriedly taking notes in the corner, but as the person sitting across from him, occasionally offering brief remarks that made the entire room fall silent in thought. A photo leaked. Nicholas leaving headquarters late one evening, and just behind him, Evelyn following. There was no physical closeness, no intimate gesture, yet the way he looked at her and the narrow space between them was too deliberate to be coincidence. The next morning, the industry's largest trade magazine ran a headline in bold red letters on a white background across its front page: "Former assistant or new flame? Who is the woman behind Nicholas Langston's midnight purge of 3 senior executives?" Evelyn read those words in a small cafe on Monday morning. Her hand froze midair, coffee spilling onto the edge of the table. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from the realization that the quiet undercurrent she had fought to keep hidden had now broken into open tide, and the media storm began. Within hours, business blogs, online tabloids, and corporate gossip forums echoed the original story, adding their own embellishments, twisting the narrative from a dozen different angles. Some called her the secret lover who once saved the real estate mogul's life. Others claimed she was a pawn placed years ago. Some even hinted that she had been the cause of Nicholas's separation from his ex-wife, though in truth, he had been divorced 3 years before Evelyn ever joined the company. The office phone rang constantly. Her inbox overflowed with interview requests from major outlets to small independent podcasts chasing scandal. Evelyn replied to no one, yet her silence only fanned the frenzy. Reporters began tracking down old neighbors, former teachers, even classmates from high school. They dug through public records from before she had changed her name and moved to Chicago. The name Evelyn Hart was no longer a shadow, it had become a headline, appearing in dozens of articles each day. Within 10 days, her face was mentioned on 3 national morning shows, though only through grainy photos and anonymous commentary. Nicholas made no public statement. He instructed the legal department to neither confirm nor deny anything. But outside Langston and Company's glass tower, each morning brought at least 2 reporters and a news van waiting for them both. Evelyn had been thrust into a storm she had never prepared to face. She had lived most of her life in silence, accustomed to being forgotten. Now every step she took was under surveillance. At the grocery store, someone snapped her photo. Leaving the building, microphones chased her for comment. Some nights she broke down in her dark apartment, asking herself what wrong she had done to lose her peace so completely. But then she remembered Nicholas's eyes when she told him she belonged to no one. They hadn't flickered with anger, but with understanding. And she knew he too was standing in the same storm, bearing just as much pressure. One evening, Nicholas walked into her office after everyone had left for the day. He said nothing at first, just sat across from her and placed a thick folder on the desk. Inside were every article, every interview request, every proposed response drafted by the communications team. He looked at her, voice steady. "The decision is yours. If you want me to speak, I will. If you want me silent, I'll remain so. If you want to step away from it all, I'll pull you out completely." Evelyn looked at him, then at the stack of papers. She took a long, deep breath. "No," she said quietly. "I'm not running anymore. I've hidden long enough. Now I'll step forward not to explain, but to stand tall as myself. I am not a scandal. I am a person." Nicholas nodded once. "Then we'll step forward together." And from that moment, the media storm was no longer something that drowned her. It was a test she was ready to face. No more hiding, no apologies, no retreat. Since the moment Evelyn decided to step into the light, her story had ceased to be merely a media headline. It had become a catalyst for speculation, debate, and even silent strategies. While part of the public praised her courage and composure, others saw her as a newly placed piece on a powerful chessboard that Nicholas Langston had long dominated. For someone who had once lived in shadows, this kind of attention was a double-edged sword. She had gained a voice, yet lost control over how that voice was heard. And worse, the eyes fixed on her no longer came only from the press or her colleagues, but from Nicholas's rivals, those waiting for the perfect moment to strike at the one weakness he had unknowingly revealed. It began with an anonymous letter slipped into her private mailbox. No signature, no return address, just one line written by hand on thin white paper. "You know more than you think. Don't believe he'll always save you." Evelyn's hands trembled as she read it. She told no one, not even security, still hoping it was just an empty threat from someone who despised Nicholas. But 3 days later, her car parked in the apartment garage was found with its window smashed. Nothing was stolen, no prints left behind, only a torn photograph placed on the driver's seat. One half showing Nicholas at a board meeting, the other showing Evelyn leaving a gas station, taken without her knowledge. The two images had no connection, yet side by side they carried a message someone was watching her and wanted her to know it. Nicholas learned of it through the building's security feed. He came to her that night, unannounced. His face was not angry but taut with suppressed tension, a kind of fear she had never seen in a man who always seemed in control. "They're using you to unbalance me," he said quietly. "You're the weakness they've found." Evelyn clenched her fists. "I don't want to be anyone's weakness." Nicholas looked at her for a long moment before shaking his head. "Not because you're weak," he said softly, "but because you're the one thing I cannot lose." The words weren't meant to soothe. They rang with a truth he could no longer hide. Evelyn felt the weight of them, but also the pressure building around them both. The next day, an article appeared on a respected financial site, alleging that Langston and Company's board had questioned internal decisions compromised by personal involvement. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew who it meant. The rumors spread quickly through investment circles. The company's stock began to waver. Strategic partners quietly delayed meetings. Nicholas stood like a mountain amid the storm, yet Evelyn saw the heaviness in his eyes as he reviewed market reports each morning. He wasn't worried about his own reputation, he worried about those he protected. about the employees who would bear the cost if the company faltered, and about her, carrying the burden of a war she never asked to fight. That evening, standing by the 42nd floor window overlooking the fog-shrouded city, Evelyn spoke softly but with resolve. I don't want to hide, but if my being here endangers what you've built, I'll step back. I don't need a title. I don't need a place. I just need to know I didn't become the reason you fell. Nicholas didn't respond at once. He stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. No one falls for protecting what they value. If they think you're a weakness, they've forgotten you once saved a life. And once again, Evelyn found herself standing on the threshold between two worlds, the realm of power and the realm of ordinary life. She had never chosen to enter that divide, but now she knew that if she had to face the storm again, she wouldn't face it alone. And if being someone's weakness was the price for being her true self, she would pay it not to be used, but to prove that gentleness could also be a kind of strength. That night, the snow fell thickly. Evelyn had just left a closed-door meeting with the legal team when the clock neared 10 p.m. She didn't want to call the company car, nor did she want Vincent or anyone from the security team accompanying her. After everything that had happened, Evelyn needed space. Just the short walk from the office to the underground parking lot would allow her to breathe a fragment of freedom she had thought lost. But as soon as the elevator doors opened on the third floor, she sensed something was wrong. The area, usually brightly lit, was half dark, with only the dim flicker of fluorescent bulbs reflecting faintly. The parking lot was unnaturally silent. No car doors slamming, no janitorial staff, no night guards. Evelyn stepped out, slowing instinctively. Her shoes echoed against the cold concrete. She drew her keys, pressing the remote unlock. Her familiar small car blinked in the corner. She quickened her pace yet stayed calm until a footstep echoed behind her. She turned. No one. Then a shadow darted from the corner. Evelyn had no time to react. A wrist was grabbed from behind, another hand clamped over her mouth. She thrashed instinctively, kicking backward, but a second arm held her shoulder. A man's voice whispered near her ear. Don't scream. We're not here to hurt you. Just a warning. Don't think you're untouchable because Langston has your back. Evelyn tried to cry out, but the sound stuck in her throat. A passing car light illuminated the distance, freezing them for a single instant, and that was all the time Evelyn needed. She stomped her heel hard onto the foot of the attacker behind her, forcing him to release her. She broke free, running toward her car, but as she turned, a punch from the right struck her shoulder, sending her crashing to the ground, head hitting the car door. Her vision blurred, ears ringing. Then another sound, tires squealing on concrete and a car door slamming. A deep, cold voice cut through the night like a knife. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Nicholas emerged from the darkness as if he had known exactly what was happening. He was not alone. Two members of his security team appeared from opposite directions, blocking the attacker's escape. One of the men tried to run, but before reaching the front of the car, Vincent tackled him down. Nicholas did not look at them, did not shout. He simply strode to Evelyn, kneeling, his hand trembling slightly as it touched her face. Are you all right? His voice was hoarse, a mixture of anger and fear. Evelyn tried to open her eyes, lips moving. I'm fine, just a little dizzy. Nicholas turned toward the subdued attackers, his gaze no longer that of a CEO. It was the eyes of a predator cornered, ready to tear apart anyone who dared touch what he protected. Take them outside, tie them up, and call Marco. I want to know who they are, who they work for, and who authorized them to touch her. Evelyn was guided into her car, knees scraped, lips bleeding, yet she remained alert. She looked at Nicholas. He sat beside her, hand still gripping hers as if fearing that loosening even slightly would make her disappear. He said nothing more, yet in that silence, she felt a force of emotion more primal and powerful than anything they had ever shared. Not obligation, not debt, but the fear of loss, a bond surpassing every boundary they had ever tried to maintain. As the car left the underground garage, snow still falling thickly outside, inside the vehicle another storm raged silent, profound, but inextinguishable. Evelyn rested her head against Nicholas's shoulder, allowing herself for the first time to feel protected. Now she no longer felt weak needing someone, and he was no longer a man indebted to her for a life saved. They had saved each other, in a way only those who have walked through darkness could understand. And that ambushed night, instead of creating distance, had drawn them closer by an ineffable space that could not be named. Nicholas's penthouse sat atop the tallest floor of a luxurious building overlooking Lake Michigan, where the city lights stretched out like artificial constellations. But tonight, that view brought no sense of peace. Evelyn sat on the leather sofa, a thin scarf draped over her shoulders, her scraped knee carefully bandaged, a cup of ginger tea long since gone cold in her hands. Nicholas stood in the corner, phone pressed to his ear, voice low, harsh, clipped, and impatient, entirely different from his usual calm demeanor. I don't care who they are. I want recordings of all incoming and outgoing calls from the past 48 hours. Trace which numbers signaled toward the parking lot. I don't care the cost. Find them. His final words cut like a blade. Then he hung up, turning to Evelyn with eyes softened but still alert. The ambush in the parking garage had changed everything. It was no longer an anonymous threat on paper. It had become action, a sign that someone intended to target her, not just to warn, but to harm. And what worried Nicholas most was the audacity of the attackers. They had dared to touch her, right under the company's security, beneath surveillance. That meant they were testing his limits and ready to cross them if not stopped immediately. While Evelyn silently watched the flickering lights beyond the glass, the penthouse phone rang. No outsider could reach that line, only internal contacts or trusted allies. Nicholas answered. A distorted voice, deep and icy, came through. Langston, now you know what happens when you play the hero. She's your weakness, and we're just getting started. Don't think you can hide her forever. One day, you won't react in time. A short, dry laugh followed, then the line went dead. Nicholas remained still, eyes unblinking. Evelyn knew instantly this was no prank. And his response, not loud anger, not shouting, sent chills down her spine. He placed the phone down deliberately, every movement calculated. They want me to act rashly, he muttered, thinking aloud, but they forget I don't play on the same board as them. Evelyn stood, approaching him, concern written on her face, not fear. He could not fight alone like this. Nicholas turned to her, eyes in that moment revealing hundreds of layers of emotion he had never shown. I thought I was untouchable, he said, that if I kept everything under control, I would never lose anyone. But when you were attacked, when your blood touched my hands, I realized I was wrong. I cannot always keep you safe, but I can make them know that just touching you comes at a price no one can bear. From that night, the penthouse ceased to be merely a retreat. It became the command center of a silent war. Nicholas summoned his most trusted allies, the ones not listed on any HR records, faces who had vanished after previous high-profile corporate acquisitions. Computers were set to monitor underground channels, virtual accounts spreading false signals to mask Evelyn's movements. A covert counterattack was launched, no shots fired, no blood spilled, yet as sharp and dangerous as any negotiation over company stakes he had ever navigated. Evelyn was no longer just someone to protect. She learned to read investigative reports, recognize forged emails, remain composed when a suspicious package appeared at the door. She did not want to be a burden, and Nicholas understood that. They began operating as two comrades, step by step, careful not to reveal any vulnerability. Each night, while the city slept under snow, they sat together at the table, sharing information, mapping out potential threats. The battle was still unseen, but it advanced steadily toward them. And in the quiet penthouse, where only the wind whispered against the glass, Evelyn knew one thing with certainty. She was no longer afraid of the dark. This time she not only had someone beside her, she had herself, growing stronger each day. And she knew that even though that threatening call was only the beginning, the true battle had already begun. The press conference was scheduled for Monday morning in the main lobby of Langston and Company's headquarters, a space that had hosted hundreds of events, yet none had ever attracted attention to this degree. The media had lined up since dawn, television vans blocked 2 blocks, and security had to cordon off the pedestrian paths outside. People came not only out of curiosity, but because of weeks of persistent rumors about the mysterious woman who had made the city's most powerful real estate mogul alter all his principles. But what no one expected was that Evelyn Hart herself had requested the press conference. Nicholas had initially opposed. He said he could handle everything privately, quash the scandal, and silence the media with a few phone calls. But Evelyn looked at him calmly and said something he could not counter. "I have been silent long enough." Standing just behind the wings, Evelyn wore a simple white blouse, no elaborate makeup, hair tied back, her gaze composed but far from weak. Nicholas stood a few steps away, hand lightly clenched, worry hidden behind his usual calm demeanor. When the coordinator signaled, Evelyn stepped into the bright lights of dozens of cameras and microphones pointed directly at her. The chatter fell silent as she lifted the microphone. "My name is Evelyn Hart. Many of you may not have heard it until a few weeks ago. I was once invisible in my own workplace. I worked diligently, avoided attention, and never imagined I would stand here to tell hundreds of people who I am. But today, I do. Not to justify myself, but to tell the truth." Her voice was not loud, but it carried clearly across the hall. She spoke of joining Langston and Company 3 years ago, of being bullied at work, of wanting to leave many times yet convincing herself that if she remained silent, everything would be okay. Then she spoke of that party of the slap, the humiliating words, the indifferent stares of those who once treated her as a shadow, and of the one man who stood among the crowd, asking no questions, requiring no proof, simply refusing to let anyone touch her. That was the moment she realized silence was no longer an option. Evelyn paused, glancing at the front row where Nicholas sat, hands intertwined, eyes unblinking. She continued, slower now but with deep force. "Yes, Mr. Nicholas Langston and I share a personal connection. But it did not start in the boardroom or the CEO's office. It began 7 years ago on a snowy night when I happened to pull a man trapped in a car from an accident. I did not know who he was, and I did not expect to meet him again. But he did not forget. And when I needed help, he did not turn away. So if you are asking whether I was promoted because of that relationship, the answer is no. I sought no special privileges. I did not use the past to claim anything. I only lived truthfully, and when the time came, I chose not to remain silent." The room was utterly still. No one interrupted or spoke over her. In that moment, Evelyn was no longer a figure in a scandal. She was a person standing up for herself. At the end of her speech, she bowed and set down the microphone. A slow beat passed, then applause began first from the back rows, then spreading like a wave throughout the hall. Nicholas did not clap, but his eyes shone with pride. He stood, stepped onto the stage, and gently placed a hand on Evelyn's back as she left the podium not to guide her, but to accompany her. The press conference ended, but its impact lingered for days. Media tone shifted. Malicious articles diminished. Some television channels invited Evelyn to speak not to probe, but to hear her recount the journey from invisibility to a symbol of courage. And somewhere, after the media storm, something new began. It was no longer the protection of a powerful man. It was a woman daring to step onto the stage of her own life and declare that she was no longer afraid. Immediately after Evelyn's press conference, public attention shifted in an unexpected way. Instead of focusing on her relationship with Nicholas as before, the media began asking the opposite questions. Who was behind these deliberate attacks? Who wanted a courageous woman to become the target of collective assault? And why did everything begin just as Evelyn became closer to Nicholas Langston? That was when Nicholas realized it was time to act not for honor, but for justice. Not to protect his reputation, but to send a decisive message. If anyone dared to touch Evelyn, the consequences would not stop at threats. Nicholas did not need to make noise. A single call to Marco, the head of the internal investigation unit whose real name no one in the company knew, was enough. Within 3 days, a chain of highly classified data had been compiled, including irregular financial transactions, suspicious transfers, and, crucially, hidden links between 3 corporations that had once competed directly with Langston and Company. Behind the veneer of private investment firms, they had secretly funded the campaign to smear Evelyn, hoping to undermine Nicholas's position, erode his support from the board, and destabilize strategic partnerships. The plan was meticulously calculated, yet one element they could not anticipate was Nicholas's absolute loyalty to those he valued, and the ruthlessness he was willing to wield when that loyalty was threatened. A 300-page report was sent directly to the attorneys of the involved parties. Nicholas released nothing to the media. He let the law speak. But in financial circles, everyone understood what was happening. Less than 2 weeks later, one of the 3 corporations was caught laundering money through a charity. The second faced a Department of Treasury investigation for stock manipulation. The third, the ringleader of the anti-Evelyn media campaign, was forced to resign by their own CEO after internal emails detailing bribes to journalists were leaked. The collapse did not happen overnight, but it fell like dominoes. One piece toppled, dragging down the entire web of lies they had constructed. And behind every move was Nicholas. He did not go on television. He did not make public statements. He did not post rebuttals. He quietly proved one thing: kindness is not weakness, and the man standing behind Evelyn was not protecting her as property, but punishing those who mistook silence for vulnerability. When quarterly financial reports were released, Langston and Company's stock rose slightly. Investor confidence returned. But more remarkable was that, for the first time in history, a media crisis ended not with an apology, but with the downfall of those who tried to manipulate it. On a quiet evening in the penthouse, Evelyn finished reading the news that one of the 3 rival companies had officially filed for bankruptcy. She set the paper down, watching Nicholas make coffee in the kitchen. He was silent, as always, but the corners of his lips curved into an almost imperceptible smile. She stepped closer, leaning lightly against the wall, voice half joking, half sincere. "So this is your version of not reacting violently?" Nicholas handed her a cup, eyes never leaving hers. "I'm simply cleaning up. Whatever needed to fall, let it fall." Evelyn accepted the cup, her gaze softening as she looked at him. In that moment, she understood clearly that behind his composed exterior and steely resolve, Nicholas Langston was a man who would never abandon anyone he had chosen to stand beside. And to those who dared to challenge that boundary, he did not need to shout. He only needed to act. That morning, the courtroom was packed, yet no one spoke. Only the rustle of papers, the gentle knock of the judge's gavel, and the thrum of nervous hearts seemed to echo against the silent walls. Evelyn sat in the front row, hair neatly pinned, wearing a sophisticated beige blouse, her gaze steady despite dozens of eyes following her every move. This was not a press conference. It was not a public stage to declare the truth as she had once done. This was a federal trial, where she was not just a witness, but a key piece in exposing the web of manipulation, threats, and defamation constructed by three rival corporations. The ambush in the parking lot had been the catalyst, but the roots of the truth ran deep enough that only the law could weigh them fully and bring closure. When the prosecuting attorney called Evelyn to the stand, all eyes turned to her. The woman once considered invisible, dismissed in her office, was now the holder of the scales of justice. She stepped forward, swore in with a clear voice and composed gaze, then began recounting everything from the early signs of suspicious anonymous emails, the repeated surveillance, to the night of the attack. Her voice did not tremble, nor did she affect drama, yet the courtroom hung on every word. She did not dramatize, did not seek sympathy. She simply recounted what had occurred, with precise details, times, and actions. And it was precisely this calmness that made her testimony sharper than any physical evidence. The defense attempted to unsettle her with leading questions, pressing on her personal relationship with Nicholas Langston, trying to paint her as a woman exploiting affection to manipulate corporate power. But Evelyn did not flinch. She looked directly at the attorney, answering each question with unyielding clarity. "I never requested a promotion. I never received privileges beyond the minimal protection any employee deserves when threatened. And if you believe that a personal relationship with a powerful man negates the credibility of what I witnessed, perhaps the issue is not me, but how we evaluate women in stories like this." Those words left the courtroom silent for several seconds. Nicholas, seated behind her, remained still. He had never intervened in this legal battle with fame or influence. He let Evelyn step forward, choose her words, and now he saw her stronger than ever. When her testimony ended, the prosecutor presented a series of corroborating evidence, recordings, emails, surveillance footage, and financial data, all forming a clear picture of a coordinated campaign to undermine Langston and Company by targeting the woman they assumed to be the weakest link. Yet that very link had exposed the entire manipulative scheme. Finally, the judge delivered the verdict. The three key figures behind the campaign were found guilty of collusion to defame a corporation, threaten employees, and unlawfully interfere with personal data. The judgment was more than a legal victory. It was affirmation for Evelyn that she had been right not to hide. She stepped out into the bright afternoon light. No security detail, no microphones encircling her. Only Nicholas waited on the steps, eyes glowing with restrained relief. She approached silently. They looked at each other, and in that gaze, everything was understood. Not because she had won, but because justice had been heard, articulated by the very person once regarded as the weakest in this game of power. And now she was no longer a witness. She was living proof that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, can rise with clarity, pride, and indomitability. The verdict was delivered on an early winter morning, the sky gray and cold, wind cutting sharply through the air. Outside the federal courthouse, people waited silently, holding their breath. The media had arrived early, cameras pointed at the main entrance, hoping to capture the moment the final ruling was announced. But for Evelyn, she did not expect a spectacle or a sensational headline. All she wanted was justice, the reckoning of those who had brazenly destroyed another's reputation, who had used power and money to conceal their wrongdoing, finally bowing before the law. And they did. After a long and tense series of proceedings, the judge handed down 3 sentences for the 3 conspirators. Each received a different term depending on their role in the scheme, but none escaped punishment. The CEO of the media company behind the false campaign faced 4 years in prison for defamation and violation of personal data. The chairman of the investment board was sentenced to 6 years for abusing power to manipulate markets and orchestrate threats against employees. And the most dangerous, the individual who had hired the ambushers in the parking lot that night, received 10 years for intentional injury and criminal conspiracy. None of them bowed or apologized, but that no longer mattered. For the first time, Evelyn felt herself heard, no longer merely enduring. Nicholas was present in the courtroom, but maintained his role as observer. He did not intervene, did not appear in any statements, did not speak to the press. He let Evelyn step forward as an independent individual, and he stood there as a silent support. As she exited the courthouse, all eyes turned to her not with scrutiny, but with acknowledgement. Some approached to shake her hand, others nodded or smiled quietly before moving on. Among the crowd were those who had once suffered workplace bullying, gender bias, and assaults society often chooses to ignore. And today, they saw hope in someone who had once been invisible. Evelyn did not cry. She did not need tears to release anything. Instead, she drew in a deep breath of the frigid air, feeling a relief she had never known, light as the weight finally lifted from her shoulders. When they sat together in the car, Nicholas placed his hand over hers. No words were needed. A gentle squeeze conveyed that everything had truly come to a close. For the first time in months, they did not have to anticipate the next move. No emergency meetings, no sleepless nights fearing surveillance. Yet within Evelyn remained something unspoken. As the car rolled through the streets, she turned to Nicholas, voice soft but steady. "I have not forgotten what they did to me. Not in anger, but as a reminder that no one should endure that alone." Nicholas's gaze softened, and no one should remain silent forever. Bullies may think they have won because their victim does not respond. But the day will come when that silence becomes the strongest accusation. Justice may arrive slowly, but once it speaks, no one can stop it. They did not celebrate. No parties, no congratulations. They simply went home, where there was no judgment, no camera lights, no showmanship, only peace. And in that moment, Evelyn knew she had weathered the storm not because the wrongdoers were punished, but because she was no longer restrained by fear. The bullies had finally paid the price, and the woman once considered the weakest had become the most proudly surviving. Evelyn's first morning back at the office after the trial dawned bright, sunlight streaming through the towering glass of Langston and Company, scattering across the polished gray tiles. She walked into the main lobby with a completely different presence. No longer the tentative steps and averted gaze, but calm and assured, as if each footfall affirmed that she was no longer the faded shadow once ignored in meetings, corridor conversations, or fleeting glances. The first thing she noticed was that the familiar silence of the office had changed. People still worked, typing at keyboards, attending meetings, yet as she passed, no one turned away as if she were invisible. Instead, they nodded, greeted her. Some smiled warmly, others approached to shake her hand gently, offering a sincere, quiet congratulations on her return. Outside the conference room, where she had once been publicly humiliated on that fateful birthday night, a new sign now read, "No one left behind." Evelyn paused, her heart tightening for a moment not in pain, but in recognition that she had stepped out of the place that had once buried her, to now stand and see it not with hurt, but with acceptance. The office itself had changed as well. Former staff involved in the smear campaign were gone. The newly hired were positive thinkers, the work environment open, and largely women. Nicholas had kept his promise to Evelyn. Langston and Company was no longer just a place of profit, but one fostering respect, fairness, and each individual's voice. In an internal meeting, Evelyn was invited for the first time to present a proposal that would surely have been overlooked before. The room listened. No interruptions, no skepticism. When she finished, the finance head nodded in approval, while the HR lead proactively inquired about implementation details. For Evelyn, this was more than a meeting. It was recognition she had never dared to dream of. Later, she returned to her desk. The workspace, once tucked into a corner near the copier, had been moved by the window not as a privilege, but because the position allowed her to work more efficiently, and everyone accepted it without complaint. Vincent, who had quietly protected her over the years, brought her a cup of hot coffee as usual, but this time added, "You have done something many of us only dared to dream of, not winning a case, but making people reconsider the silence they keep." Evelyn said nothing, but her eyes warmed. She understood, for she had once been silent herself. By noon, while heading to the break room for water, a new employee smiled and said, "I'm inspired by you. I used to think that if I were oppressed, I should just endure it. But you made me think differently." In the afternoon, Nicholas walked past the workspace, stopping at her desk like any ordinary boss checking in. He said nothing grand, simply looked at her and asked softly, almost subtly, "Are you okay?" Evelyn nodded, smiling gently. "I no longer feel invisible." Nicholas smiled and nodded lightly before walking on. In that moment, Evelyn realized she needed neither title nor position to prove her worth. She only needed to be seen, to be heard. And now, she had both. The office was no longer a place that stifled her, it had changed. And so had she. It was a late afternoon, the office thinning out, golden sunlight streaming through the high-rise glass, casting a warm glow across every corner. Evelyn had just finished her last meeting of the day when a message from Nicholas arrived. "Come to the rooftop. I'm waiting." She smiled softly, tidied her documents, and stepped into the elevator. The Langston and Company rooftop was not a place everyone frequented, but for Nicholas, it was where he went to think, to find quiet, or simply to breathe air untainted by phone calls and emails. When the doors opened, Evelyn saw him standing by the railing, hands in his pockets, white shirt sleeves rolled up, a gentle breeze lifting his hair. He did not turn immediately. Only when he heard her steps did he speak. "Have you ever thought that it all started 7 years ago, on that dark night?" Evelyn stepped closer, standing beside him, hands resting lightly on the railing. "Yes," she said, "but I never imagined we would meet again, let alone that I would stand here, beside someone like you." Nicholas turned to look at her, his gaze no longer the sharp edge of a businessman, but the soft weariness of a man who had weathered enough storms to know what truly matters. "I always believed I owed you a life. For years, I could not forget your eyes as you pulled me from that car about to explode. You were not panicked, nor did you run like everyone else. You just did what had to be done, and then you disappeared." Evelyn smiled lightly, gazing at the horizon. "At that moment, I only thought that if I did nothing, I might regret it for the rest of my life. I never imagined I was saving an important life. I only saw someone in pain." Nicholas nodded, his gaze slowing. "But what I did not expect is that this debt made me the one in need of forgiveness." Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "Forgiveness? For what?" Nicholas exhaled, voice deepening. "For letting you endure too long in silence. I thought observing from afar, protecting without intervening, would be enough. But I was wrong. You deserve to stand, to be seen, to be heard far earlier than that." Evelyn was silent for a moment, then placed her hand over his. "I never blamed you. If anything hurt me, it was that I took too long to believe I deserved to step into the light." The afternoon wind blew stronger, carrying the scent of flowers planted around the rooftop, softening the space into a necessary pause. Nicholas squeezed her hand lightly, then spoke, this time with gravity. "Evelyn, if today I told you that I wanted to repay that debt not with action, but with opportunity, would you be willing to accept it?" Evelyn looked at him, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. Was he asking if she wanted to do something greater for the company, or if she was ready to step into a journey with no turning back? Nicholas was silent for a few seconds, then nodded. They both nodded. She stepped closer, her gaze no longer timid. Then you should know this. I am no longer afraid of challenges. I no longer hide behind anyone. But if you wish to accompany me, do not call it a debt. Between us, that debt ended long ago. Now there is only choice, and I choose to walk with you, not for the past, but for a future that we both deserve to build ourselves. Nicholas studied her for a long moment, then let out a soft laugh, the first in many tense days. He knew he had not chosen the wrong person, and at that moment, beneath the fading sunset over the high rise, there was nothing left to bind them in obligation, only two people who had walked through pain, now stepping slowly into something new, sincere, and fearless. Since that late afternoon conversation on the rooftop, the relationship between Evelyn and Nicholas had transcended old definitions like benefactor or protector. It had moved far beyond the boundaries of a powerful CEO and an employee once overlooked. What they chose to retain was understanding, respect, and a connection that needed no words yet was palpable to anyone observing. From this shift, profound changes began to unfold, not only in how they saw each other, but also in the role each played in the other's life. Evelyn was no longer part of the administrative department. After the upheavals, Nicholas proposed establishing a specialized internal team focused on corporate ethics and workplace culture, and the only person he wanted to lead it was Evelyn, not as a ceremonial gift, but because he understood that no one else had the courage and sensitivity to hear the voices of the vulnerable within a vast organization like Langston and Company. She did not just agree. She proactively redesigned the entire internal feedback system, building a support network for employees facing bullying or discrimination. Within months, the company culture had shifted dramatically. Employees who once believed silence is safety began to speak up, knowing that they would be heard. One day, as Nicholas passed by Evelyn's new workspace, he paused to look through the glass. She was listening to a young employee, hand lightly resting on a notebook, eyes attentive, her demeanor calm, gentle, and sincere, rather than rigid or authoritative. Nicholas smiled softly, realizing Evelyn no longer needed protection. She had become the person others turned to for guidance and care. During a board meeting, when a major shareholder suggested placing Evelyn on the executive board due to her positive influence and natural leadership, Nicholas said little, simply nodding and remarking, "She is the person we should have chosen from the beginning." That evening, Evelyn sat in her office, gazing at the city lights, her mind full of thoughts. Nicholas entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, a habit neither could resist. They sat together, words unnecessary at first, until Evelyn broke the silence. "You know, there were times when I thought your presence in my life was a shield, a cover to hide behind whenever the world became too harsh. But now I realize you are not a shield. You are someone who chose to stand beside me, giving me the courage to remove all the layers of armor." Nicholas looked at her, his eyes no longer those of a man who had once treated protection as a mission. He smiled, placing his hand on his cup, voice low and deliberate. "And you are no longer someone who needs protection. You are the one I choose to walk with. Not because I owe you, not because you need someone, but because you have shown me that kindness is not weakness, and courage need not be loud." There was no longer anyone leading or following, no one bearing the responsibility of protecting the other. Between them, all distances had dissolved. Evelyn was no longer the timid girl at the administrative desk. She was no longer the shadow in the cold, endless corridor. And Nicholas was no longer the man she was obliged to be grateful to. They were 2 mature individuals who had chosen each other after everything, not because of fate, not because of debt, but simply because, in a world full of chaos and concealment, They had found in each other a rare sense of security, not through protection, but through freedom and choice. And as they left the office together, walking side by side under the streetlights, the city remained loud as ever, but their hearts were quietly at peace. No need to hide anything, no more protection, only choice. And that was more enduring than anything else. On a bright spring morning, as cherry blossoms bloomed along the street in front of Langston and Company, Evelyn stood before the large mirror in her new office, adjusting the ivory silk scarf around her blouse collar. No more downward glances, no more shrinking posture. The woman in the mirror was a completely different version of the girl who once walked quietly down office corridors, as if apologizing for her very existence. Now she looked straight at herself with clear yet steady eyes, shoulders no longer burdened by fear, and a heart no longer tightened by silence. That day's meeting was a high-level strategic session for the entire corporate system, and Evelyn was the one to open the presentation. As she stepped onto the podium, no one looked at her with doubt or pity. They saw her as a leader, someone worthy of standing there not because anyone had granted it, but because she had earned it through resilience and integrity. Nicholas sat in the front row, eyes never leaving her, yet this time he did not need to stand beside her to protect or support her, for the woman before him was no longer in the shadows. After the meeting, Evelyn went out onto the balcony, feeling the breeze drift through her hair, eyes gazing at the distant city bustling with motion. Everything remained noisy, hurried, and still dotted with pockets of power and injustice. But she was no longer afraid. She had learned that silence does not protect from suffering, it only prolongs the pain. She also understood that people like Nicholas, who may seem cold and distant, are often the ones who extend a hand when you fall. Most importantly, she realized that when a woman dares to step out of her comfort zone, to speak, to stand, to believe in her own worth, light will always be waiting ahead. Evelyn's story was not only a love story that touched the heart, but also a journey of courageous personal growth. It was a reminder that while we cannot always control what happens to us, we can choose how to face it. We can choose fear, or we can choose to speak. We can choose to hide, or we can step into the light. If you have followed this far, I trust you can feel Evelyn's inner strength, and perhaps in her story, you see yourself, or someone you have known. What do you think about Evelyn Hart's journey? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between silence and speaking out? Between fear and moving forward? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments below. We want to hear from the heart of every viewer because your story might inspire someone else. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss more moving stories from the Underworld Love Stories channel. Please like and share this video if you feel her story deserves to reach more people. Every share is a seed of hope, an extension of empathy. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Wishing you and your loved ones health, happiness, and peaceful, fulfilling days. Goodbye, and see you in the next video with more heartfelt stories full of human meaning.